What's Your Work Fit is sponsored by Hudson Davis. Start your brand's marketing and communications journey today at hudsondaviscommunications.com. I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolin from What's Your Work Fit. I hope you're having a good and successful day. My apologies to our viewers who are watching live on LinkedIn. We're a little late getting you into the broadcast, but I hope that you're watching us live, and thank you for being here. If it's not for our live viewers, the show wouldn't have the gravitas that it does and the utility that it does. So I thank you very much for that. A couple little housekeeping items before we get to our guest today. This is going to be our last live show of 2023. Dan needs a break, and I'm looking forward to taking a few weeks off to rest, to reflect, and to get ready for 2024. We have some great guests lined up already for January, including one who happened to be a social media star in 2023. I'm going to leave it at that. She's amazing, and she has a story to tell that impacts future of work and workplace. So join us in January for that. Okay, let's get to it. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Serena Huang. She is with Data with Serena, and Dr. Huang is a globally recognized data scientist and worker insight expert. Good day, Serena. Welcome to What's Your Work Fit.
Thank you for having me, Dan. So great to see you again.
So great to see you. And we did see each other in real life. You were so kind to reach out to me last month. We got to meet up during one of your visits to Washington, D.C. And that leads me to why you were in D.C. It was to do your Data with Serena work. What is that all about? And what is the value that you provide to your attendees, your members as such?
Sure. Yeah, it was one of my Data with Serena fall tour sites in DC, where I was giving a all-day workshop on how to use data analytics in making talent decisions. So that's the work I do now, speaking and training and a little bit of consulting with organizations that need a little bit more help getting started with talent data. That includes employee surveys, that includes all the data in your HR system, that includes occasionally which system do I pick to house my HR data. And then just for fun, since I became an accidental influencer on LinkedIn last year, I also do brand partnerships with analytics and well-being companies who want to get some help amplifying their message.
We'll give you an opportunity at the end of the show today to point people to where they can find you. So if they want to do partnerships with you or just get to know you, they can do that. But before we get to that, let's get to our main question today. So our question today comes from Caroline. Hey, Caroline, thank you so much for your submission. Caroline is an HR specialist at an engineering firm with about 400 employees. So not really large and not a, bootstrap startup either. The Intuition tells her that her company misses countless opportunities to draw insight from the people that work there. And often, and here's the rub, when talent do leave, they're a big surprise, especially to members of the C suite.
Right.
So there are a lot of available data about the company's employees, but Caroline isn't sure that they are at all useful or tell her much about the goals, aspirations, and happiness pursuits of the people that work for the firm. So Carolyn asks you, Serena, how can data guide the employee experience? So how, let's help her out. How can data guide the employee experience?
Yeah, first of all, great question. And a lot of times our leadership team is surprised by exits. And oftentimes companies would do something like an exit interview, whether it's a sit down between the employee who's leaving and someone from HR, or a survey that's sent out to employees.
Right.
In my experience, that is too little too late. Now, by the time the employee has already resigned, there's almost no chance of you saving that employee. What I would recommend instead of getting an alternative data that is more useful is something called stay interviews. Stay interviews are conducted with people who are relatively happy with the company and before they even have the thought of leaving. But you're having honest conversations about what might prompt you to want to leave. Is it a truckload of money from somewhere else? Is it better work life balance? Is it being able to bring your dog to work? Whatever that situation might be, you're having those conversations months and maybe years in advance so that you know what is working well in retaining your employees today. That works much better than the exit interviews where most likely employees are not super inclined to fill them out or have the conversation because they don't want to burn the bridges, right?
Right.
To really, if you think about it, what incentives do they have at that point to help your organization? But a state interview, on the other hand, they have a lot of incentive to tell you what's working well so that you can keep doing those things to retain them. But I would say for companies that are a bit larger, or even with exit problems in the past and that have gathered exit interview survey data, um,
Mhm.
it's often missed opportunity that I've seen. A lot of times you can see trends of, things like how long have people been looking? How long were they maybe disengaged? Are there issues with management that you need to address? Are there issues with the company new direction, right? We have been through so much change since COVID.
Mhm.
Is there anything going on there that the leadership team can actually address? Or is it additional training for managers and support them better so they can retain the employees? Or is it something out of your control, which happens a lot as well? Maybe someone's spouse got a new job in a new city and the
Right.
family has to move. Maybe they decide to go back to school, out of your control. But potentially you can look at your tuition reimbursement policy and make it available to employees who want to pursue that route while working full time. So there are lots of data you can get from those exit interview surveys if you do have them to take a look and see what's going on.
I want to take a step back from the why that we do the surveys to the how that we do the surveys because, and I've heard this a lot. I used to hear this a lot in the early stages of COVID, where the CEO would say, "Well, we got a Survey Monkey account. Let's do something with it." Right? It's not. It's costing money. Let's do something with it. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's kind of getting a little ahead of your skis here. So I want to get to Joel's question first. Thank you, Joel, for this. He's asking for an explanation of the difference between quantitative and qualitative workplace preference research and the benefits of each. So um, take us through that. What are the differences and how what are the examples of how they are distributed?
Yeah, so quantitative research will be things like surveys that you mentioned, Dan. It could be employee engagement surveys, it could be the exit surveys, it could be onboarding survey or
Mhm.
candidate experience survey that you fill out during the recruiting process. all of that, where a question can be translated into a score, would be considered quantitative. Now, qualitative, oftentimes you hear this a lot in marketing, something called focus groups. That
Hmm.
would be more qualitative research where sitting down, either virtually or in person, with individuals and asking them specific questions about the workplace instead of a particular product. And then you gather that feedback over time and turn that into a summary that is useful. The difference between the two, obviously, if you think about the amount of time and effort it would take to do qualitative work,
Right.
qualitative research, focus group type things, it takes a lot more, right? So that means the people who can carve out time for you to sit down with you for 30 minutes to an hour, that's going to be a smaller pool than the people who can fill out a 5 minute, 10-minute survey. So your reach will be a little bit different. So selecting, depending on the topic, you might want to do a combination of both, where
Ah,
you use the quantitative on simple to answer questions that is on 1.1 to 5 point scale, but then the qualitative you reserve it for either topics that may be more sensitive or topics that might require more context, where you can ask follow-up questions as opposed to a simple straight 1 to 5 answer on a survey. What are those qualitative questions that I'm talking about? Well, sometimes we mention things like mental health, right? Policies that are new and maybe a little bit controversial. Maybe it's return to work, return to
right.
office, right? Those things where you can't, you want to have the full context when someone answers, no, I don't want to go back, or yes, I want to go back, or I'm not familiar with any of the benefits, or I'm worried about the stigma. You want to be there to ask the follow-up questions, which a survey cannot easily do. So that's how I recommend. And the power I've seen is actually combining both, where you have
Interesting.
quantitative on those more straightforward, I'll call, questions where you can get large number of responses and high participation rate, but then focus groups on those specific targeted questions that are really important to the organization, but it might be difficult to get at in a survey format.
How do you wrestle with statistical significance? Now, I don't mean to get really wonky here, but if you're in a if you're in
That's
a
never lucky.
if you're not in a big multinational company like 3M or whatever, I'm just throwing names out here, getting statistical significance so that if you're pulling a sample of, let's say, 1,000 participants and you only yield 500 responses, you're sure that you can make some broad generalizations, some conclusions about the data that you've captured, and you're not unwittingly capturing a niche that tells you the wrong story.
Yeah. So one of the metrics I'll recommend companies to always think about, regardless of your size, is the response rate or participation rate on the
Hmm.
survey.
Hmm.
So even if your company is small, if you're able to get, let's say, 80+% participation rate, that is pretty good. That means you should probably have decent amount of confidence in the survey results. If you only get 50% of people respond, then you know that you're not hearing from half of your population. So
Right.
you should probably be cautious in creating a new policy tailoring only half of the population who responded. Now, a lot of times when you do surveys more frequently, your response rate or participation rate will drop. That is very natural. So definitely keep an eye out for that. But for something like an annual survey, if you don't have at least 70+%, then it's probably time to revisit the why people are not responding to the surveys. A lot of times, employees, in my experience, don't respond to surveys simply because, not because they don't have time, simply because they don't think any actions will be taken on their feedback.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'll
So
give you,
go
yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
And when is the last time you were in an Uber? We
About
did
a
not
month.
realize
About a
this.
month ago.
Okay,
About a
okay.
Yeah.
Did you do the 5-star rating after you get out of the car?
Yes, they always prompt you to do that.
Yep. See, why do you do that? But when an employer sends you a survey, you may or may not fill this out. Everyone always fills it out on the Uber app, right? Because it matters.
Yeah.
Because it matters for you the next time, whatever, and you hope that you get the 5-star rating on the other side too, right?
Right.
So there's clear incentives, there's clear impact of that feedback that you're giving the driver
Mhm.
immediately.
Mhm.
On the other hand, organizational surveys don't always have that Uber effect, right? You
Mm.
have no idea when you're going to hear back from anyone who designed the survey, let alone actions taken on it. So I definitely see that as the gap in, one, designing a survey by asking questions that actually matter, that make employees believe you will do something with it, and then two, actually communicate what you are doing with it that will keep people from coming back and making sure you have high participation rate. And yeah, and I think, when you have that, then you worry a lot less about significance and things like that. I would say one caveat,
Mhm.
because this comes up a lot in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. Oftentimes, you will have a group of employees who are, minority at your company, whether that's
Mhm.
women in tech, whether that's people of color, whatever the demographic might be. It can be a very small group. Now, I would say in those cases, a small group who respond should not be ignored because they are going to be small. And those who are willing to actually respond to your survey deserve to have their voices heard. And that's the case when I would say you don't need, if you cannot get 80% plus participation rate from that group of individuals,
Mhm.
still pay close attention to what they're saying, because without their voice, you might be designing a new system and policy that is not inclusive, that doesn't account for their voice. So always slice and dice your data by different demographic data that you have and see whether or not different groups are responding differently.
Um, is learning how to do crosstabs difficult for people that are not like you, that are not technically inclined, so that they can get those crosstab insights?
I don't think so. I mean, I think a lot of advancements have been made in out of the box reporting and analytics. So
Mhm.
you can easily tell, just from very simple software, what it looks like, will draw charts for you and things like that. But when in doubt, ask the experts as well, just to double check before you make strong conclusions and decide to change something.
I want to get to Brooke's question and comment, and I get the sense that she works for
Mhm.
a very aggressive CEO who wants to know everything and wants to be so proactive. But as she points out, can too going too deep into the weeds into measuring employee experience uh, create actual analysis paralysis. So you've got a lot of data, but it's not actionable insight at the end of the day. How do you how do you manage against that, Serena, so that you're getting actual learning that A will help you retain a happy workplace and talent, B keep them longer, C deal with issues before they become problems or full blown crises, and D uh, create the environment that it's the talent that work for that brand that make the brand what it is. I mean, how do you
Wow.
manage the big effort so that you're not getting caught in the weeds, so to speak, but you actually learn some actionable insight that the C-suite can jump on and say, okay, we're going to do the following. We've heard from you, and this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. And that's a huge wish list, by the way, Dan.
Oh well,
Very
yeah, but
ambitious.
yes,
Very
but
ambitious.
but I'm sure you deal with
Yes,
C-suiters that put out the
indeed.
kitchen sink, right?
Indeed. And in my experience, they care about two things typically.
Okay.
One, how to hire better.
Hmm.
And by better, I don't mean just faster, but actually improve the quality of hires. Two, how do we retain talent? Not every single person, but particularly the ones that are performing well, that are really
Mhm.
contributing to the company. So attract and retain are going to be the two questions that you want to be able to use data to solve.
Right.
So I always recommend that analysts or HR professionals to not start with the data. Again, I'll repeat, don't start with the data, but start with the problem that you want to solve. Do you have a retention problem? If you don't even have a retention problem, don't worry about it. Right? Don't dig into the retention issues in your survey if your attrition rate is super low. If you have a hiring issue, maybe that's where your focus is. How is onboarding going? Are you even asking the right questions to the right people about onboarding to get a sense of what can be improved? So a lot of times I think I see people jumping way ahead and diving into the data without clarifying, am I solving the problem that is keeping my CEO up at night? Look, if you
Right.
don't know what's keeping your CEO and your board of directors up at night, you gotta start there. That means you
Right.
don't know the business well enough. That means you don't know the context well enough to create any analysis at that point. Because you might be in a rabbit hole and you'll come up with solutions that no one cares about. So,
Right.
I made that mistake as a junior analyst early on in my career. I hired my first data scientist, super excited, create this predictive attrition model, super accurate, like 98+%, incredible. I was going to predict who is going to leave and all these amazing things. So I brought it to one of my internal clients and HR leader and said, I got this great model. It's going to solve world hunger and tell you who's going to leave. And she's like, oh, that's great, Serena. But my attrition rate has stayed under 2% over the past 5 years. What really
Uh,
worries me is that I have no bench. My leaders are about
right.
to retire. 50% of them are eligible for retirement. And can your model help me with that? So I learned my lesson early on that to not bring solutions to a problem that I'm not
Right.
sure needs to be solved. So start
I
with
w-
the problem, not the data.
I would imagine that to an energetic junior data analyst, that's something that's probably going to happen. You're so excited to be
Yes.
reading reading data and gleaning
Yeah.
insights from them that perhaps you're solving a problem that doesn't exist and ignoring one that is burning like a dumpster fire.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And like I said, having those stakeholder conversations on a regular
Right.
basis. Again, if you are very junior in your career, maybe there's a few levels, a few layers between you and the leader. To make sure you get that from your manager, your leadership team on what problem to solve. Don't be afraid to challenge them too. If you see your leader getting down into some rabbit hole, ask them,
Mhm.
why are we solving this problem? And make sure they have a good answer for that. So, the other advice that, because I have been there and I was so excited to share the cool data, the sophisticated analysis I did. And frankly, the executives, in my experience, they don't care. They don't have time. You are already here. You are already smart. So you don't need to prove to anyone how smart you are. Find a technical expert inside the company and share that, the blood, sweat, and tears that went into analysis with them, but not the executives. Tell them what they need to do with the data really fast. So that will save you some additional pain, hopefully.
I I want to deal with the paranoia aspect of being on the receiving end from some of these queries. Many years ago, I worked for a marketing communications agency, and one of our vendors sent us a confidential survey. But we noticed on the bottom of each of the surveys, we got a tiny little code number, and they were all different. So they knew who was answering what survey. It wasn't actually
Oh
confidential in
wow!
the end. And
Oh no!
yeah, and I think that iterations of that probably exist to this day. And I want to get with I want to bring up two questions that were asked that sort of get to confidentiality. Randy Spina is an adjunct professor, among other things, and she asks, can collecting data confidentially better shape the work culture that best serves employees? And I'm going to pair that with another academic, Diane Gajewski, who is a leading thought leader in EX, and asks, how do employees want to be heard? Is it anonymously, more through focus groups, one-on-one with managers, meeting with leaders, or a mix thereof? Wondering, I know that's a lot. We're dealing with confidentiality. We're also dealing with data collection choice, and I'm wondering if you could
Yeah,
respond to those.
sure. Yeah, first of all, I want to clarify there's a difference between confidential and anonymous. So
Right,
anonymous means you can't figure out who said what at all. Confidential means oftentimes you might have a third party vendor that is keeping the data separate from the company so that they
right,
hold the data for you and it's keeping it confidential so none of your managers can figure out what you said about them on the survey.
right,
Most companies now run confidential and not anonymous surveys for various reasons. One of the reasons is actually this is an extreme case, but having run blood survey work for a long time, you see some situations that where there might be a situation where you need to identify an employee who needs help. Sometimes employees are so isolated that they use the survey as the only channel to communicate back to the company what they really need help with.
right,
Again, this is very rare, but when there's a cry for help that requires immediate attention, and you need to, unfortunately, at that point, uncover the identity of an individual who might be at risk to themselves or to others at work. That's a
right.
situation where if you have something that is completely anonymous, you
You
might
don't know.
be actually facing more risk as an
Right.
organization because now you don't even know which organization this employee who needs help is in. So again,
Mhm.
like from experience, I know those things do happen, and you want to have a way to help employees, right? At the end of the day, that's what the surveys are for, right? It's not to make the organization feel good, but to help the employees and change the environment for the better.
Mhm.
So that's the difference between confidential and anonymous. And the one thing I'll say is also a lot of times people have been more willing to share than I expected. Surveys get a lot of bad rap, and oh, no one's going to be honest. They will tell you what they want to hear. And perhaps it's the organizations I've been with, but that hasn't been the case from what I have seen in the past few years at least. There is a huge push for transparency and authenticity that we're now seeing in mainstream media and social media. And I definitely have seen that transformation within employees' responses. People are sharing struggles that I didn't think people would share openly. And that's a great thing about the organization. Now, often that reflects there's a high level of psychological safety that they when employees are willing to share. That means they believe they will be heard. They believe something will happen to their feedback and they won't be ignored. And that's why they're sharing those things. So I think that's an encouraging sign, especially with the newer generations in the workforce who also value very much transparency, authenticity. They do want to share. Right? Think about the any viral TikTok videos recently about how badly they were treated during a layoff.
Mhm.
That's not something I would expect maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Mhm.
But now they're there. They're not hiding their identity. They're sharing which employer did wrong to them, sharing publicly. So I would say don't be surprised by how willing people are to share when you have a level of psychological safety in the organization. And when there is not, right, that's another problem to solve. That's not going to be solved by doing more surveys or less surveys, but really figuring out what has happened in the past that prevented people perhaps from sharing honestly with the leadership team or with whoever is gathering the data.
So I have never been a data scientist, although I've worked with several in my career, and it was a wonderful experience. But we both shared this conundrum, which was when we both did specialized work, the data scientist, but also I as an executive recruiter, whereby I was highly consultative. I used a lot of interviewing. I dug deep to really understand what my client needed in terms of the talent that they needed to hire. Okay. What I noticed, Serena, was that in both cases, when somebody didn't understand our value to them, they
Hmm.
considered what we did very expensive. But when they understood the value of what we provided them, you as a data scientist, me as a headhunter, then it became an investment. So I'm wondering what experiences you've had going into a new client who's been a little skeptical, where you've been able to turn them around and they, at the end of the work that you've done for them, they recognize your enduring value and the investment that they've made in you is really paying off. Are there any examples of turnaround stories that you can tell where your data really helped right the ship, so to speak?
Yeah. Right. So I um I was in an organization that was very skeptical of more frequent surveys, and they have been
Right,
running this annual engagement survey, super long and boring that no one wanted to take for a very long time.
right.
And it was the time of return to office debate that just would not end. It doesn't seem like it has ended right now either. And so I proposed something different. I said, look, the debate that you are having is about whether or not people ultimately can collaborate better in the office, can
Right.
work more efficiently in the office, whether or not we can continue to innovate, right? So those are the things that you ultimately care about.
Mhm,
What if so this is during a time when return to the office was voluntary, so you can choose where to work. I said, why don't I design a daily survey that asks people about those topics that you care about, whether it's
mhm,
productivity, collaboration, innovation, and so on. And then let's see if there's a difference, and we'll also ask where you're working today. And let's see if there's a difference between the environment and those outcomes that we care about, right? It seems
mhm,
like a simple analysis. I immediately got told, Serena, no one will fill out a daily survey. We are
mhm,
just not that kind of culture. And I said, okay, that's fine. Why don't you give me 7 days? And if no one responds, if the participation was below a certain threshold, I will remove the survey immediately. You
mhm.
have my promise. But give me 7 days, just a week to test this out. Okay. So, with a lot of skepticism, and I was, crossing my fingers and toes that people will respond, I was surprised. I had thousands of responses. This was a topic they very much care about. They were willing to answer the one question a day, or technically two. One also asked them where they're working, in the office or remotely. And with that, we were able to finally put the debate to sleep, because ultimately there was no significant difference
Right.
between the location, between people who are working those locations on the metrics that we care about.
Mhm.
So again, this is one point in time, and if we were to do that again today, the results might be different.
Right.
But at the time, we were stuck in a debate that no one could solve, and none of the external research from fancy organizations would solve the problem, because it was not their own data. It was someone else's data. Our employees are probably different. You're right. So let's get their voices and see what's going on in their minds right now, and then do something about it. So I share that as an example because I was partially hopeful as well that I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I thought there's a small chance that I would really have to take down the survey within 3 days because no one would respond. I was pleasantly surprised, but that people were willing to share. Again, it goes back to, are you asking questions that matter to the employees, and then do they believe you will do something about it? That's the key to, it's not about the format, it's not about the frequency, it's not about which channel it comes through. It's really the, are you asking me about something I care about? Do I believe you will do something with my data? That's it. At the end of the day, that's it. Just like the Uber app.
Well, and I found this 2 years ago when I had developed some intellectual property that I had patented, which was asking fewer questions is novel. People tend to appreciate it. They feel respected when you focus on one or two questions. And it's the complete opposite of what I call the Subaru survey tsunami, not an SST, which is every time I get the oil changed on my Outback, I get a survey that's about 50 questions long. And I'm like, why are you asking me about my purchase horizon? I told you when I visited you, I plan on keeping the car. And it's when you do that that things, I think, tend to fall apart. So you proved
Yeah.
the 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 value of a novel technique, which was if you ask one question a day or two questions a day, the recipient of that question is going to feel respected, and you'll probably get more honest feedback from them than
Yeah,
taking more of their time, which takes their focus away from the work that you want them doing in the first place. So good on you for that. That's
exactly.
wonderful. That's wonderful. Serena, I hate to say this, we've run out of time. And before we
Oh no.
depart, yeah, I know, we got to get you back on in 2024 because the work you do is fascinating and you are a good friend. And I really enjoy hearing your journey through this. Before we ask the final question, I was wondering if you could point our viewers and listeners to you so that they can engage with you to learn more about what you do, perhaps even work with you at some point to help them through their understanding of their own workplaces. So, where would they find you and how can they contact you?
Yeah, that would be lovely. So I can be reached at datawithserena.com, one word, or you can
Mhm.
find me on LinkedIn, of course. I do share daily content and on various topics from analytics to mental health at work to sometimes I share the art, like the one I painted in back. So a variety of content that you can follow along. And I also recommend if you're curious about people analytics as a field and you are new to it, I have a LinkedIn learning course that's got 15,000 learners already today.
Wow.
It's the data science of using people analytics that you're welcome to check out also on my website, and tell me what you think. I do talk about employee surveys in there, so could be a nice follow up to today's conversation.
I do hope that when we do bring you back, we talk about art because it does have a healing aspect to it, and I want to know all about the work that you're doing around art and the benefits that it has. Okay, let's get to our question. What's your work fit, Serena Wong? Tell us what attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work a wonderful part of your day doing other wonderful things. And this is the most important part, is not the total time suck of a day. So what's your work fit?
Oh, a couple words come to mind:
Okay.
autonomy and impact. So
Ooh.
I like to work autonomously. I like to choose where I work, when I work, and of course, as a solopreneur, I get the luxury of doing that now. And then impact. One of the reasons I left corporate is because I wanted to have a much larger impact than just with one single company. So I'm now on a mission to help the world learn to love data with Serena, hence my company, Data with Serena.
Well, if with most of our viewers are on LinkedIn, I will tell you this, if you connect up with Serena, you will not be disappointed. Her storytelling ability is phenomenal, and I think you will enjoy every post that she puts up. Thank you so much for being on. Have a great rest of 2023. We'll see you in 2024, Serena.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.